Hi, my name is Orion. My mother named me after an equatorial constellation. She loved astrology and always believed that constellations mattered a lot in a person's life, or rather, under which star they began their journey. My mother prophesied a bright future for me, full of light and love. Despite the fact that she raised me on my own, my childhood was indeed a good one. I didn't need any extra love. My mother replaced my whole world. We had many traditions. We read books together, my mother told me about the stars, and she also always said before bed every night, "You are my greatest star, Orion." She would kiss me and go off to sleep. After 1.5 hours one night, I got a call from the hospital saying my mom had been in an accident. She had gone to the store to buy me a promised cake for tomorrow. After all, it was my birthday. When I rushed to the hospital, I saw her lying motionless. She'd had emergency surgery, but she hadn't regained consciousness. The doctor said she'd become comatose and had been put on a ventilator.
Your mom wants to live. The hit and run of the car was severe. 99% of the time, people die at the scene, but your mom, she made it through the surgery well. I think she wants to live badly, and I think she's anxious to see you.
The doctor's words gave me great hope, which I carried in my heart for many, many days, then months, and then years. That's right, it's been 10 years since that terrible accident. I had time to grow up, graduate high school, and work to pay my mom's hospital bills. It wasn't easy, but I got through it. Every day I went to my mom's room, read our books to her, and reminded her that I was her brightest star, Orion. It was my birthday once again, and I brought myself a little cake and made a wish that Mom would wake up and blow out the candles with me. Maybe some magic happened, but it was at that moment that my mom suddenly opened her eyes. "Doctor! Doctor!" I screamed the whole room like a lunatic. Tears flowed from my eyes. I couldn't believe this day had come. My relatives talked every year about me taking her off the ventilator, but I went against all of them. Even though it was hitting my pocket, I worked to keep my mom alive, even if it was in that condition. I sat on the floor and cried while the doctors did their exams. I touched her arm and my mother looked at me. Little by little, she was recovering. Meanwhile, I continued to sit with her. After a couple of days, she was able to say something. I immediately asked her how she was feeling. Mom was quiet and then said,
Okay, thank you, doctor.
"What? Doctor? Mom, don't you recognize me?" Then the doctor intervened, asked her some questions. She answered her name, gave her date of birth, names of relatives, but she did not recognize me. "No, what's going on? Why, doctor?"
She must have painful memories of you, and her brain is now protecting itself from harm. It's temporary amnesia. Just be there for her and be understanding. Your mom got seriously injured and spent 10 years in a coma. It's all very hard on her. After all, you've visibly grown up, so she may just not recognize you. Give her time.
I had no choice but to accept that fact. After about a month, she was discharged. My mother called me nurse, and she was always amazed at how well I took care of her. She didn't recognize our house either. I had to tell her she was here temporarily. Before going to bed, I covered her with a blanket and told her again that I was her brightest star. My mother replied,
"How beautifully you talk."
At first, I had no trouble cooking for her, but she acted like a child, saying she wouldn't eat this or that. She kept demanding chips and chocolate and soda, and when I said no, she would sit on the floor and cry. She could leave the water faucet running, leave the refrigerator open, watch TV all day, and not clean the house. I wasn't looking after my mother, I was caring for a small child. One day when I went out to the store and came home, I saw that she wasn't in the house. I started looking all over for her and couldn't find her. It took me more than 2 hours to find her, so I called the police. It wasn't until closer to nightfall that I got a call from the station saying that she was there. Mom was sitting in the office crying in a chair, and when she saw me, she said I was the evil aunt who wouldn't let her go home to her mom. I exploded. "What aunt? Are you crazy? I'm your fucking daughter! Mom, wake up already! Come to your senses!" But she threw a tantrum. The policeman helped bring her home, and I was still shaking with anger. Mom had torn up all the pictures of us together, so I decided to take her to see her family. She recognized them all and also acted like a child around them. She demanded her mother, then her sister. Aunt Lim then took her to the cemetery where their mom was buried. It was a shock to her. Mom sat on the ground and covered her face with her hands at the same minute. Then she started screaming like she was in pain. Then she raised her head and looked at me.
Orion?
I was so excited. Yes, Mom, it's me, Orion. And then she passed out and we took her to the hospital. The doctor said she was fine now. It was just that great stress and painful memories had taken their toll. However, it could be dangerous for her. She might not be able to take it and go into a coma again. It sounded like a verdict. When my mother was released home, she didn't recognize me again. She said she wanted to go back home, and my aunt took her to her house for a while, to the house where my mother grew up. She didn't want to see me anymore. She thought I was an evil aunt. I went back to our house again, the empty house. I had to say goodbye to her and let her go for her own good. I was homesick without her, but I didn't know how to go on living. Then I was accepted to college, where I was supposed to go after I graduated high school. Prom was coming up. I asked my aunt to bring my mom there, supposedly for a concert. I wanted to see her one last time. I had been through a lot of pain and anguish. It was probably time to let her go. I got up on stage, and the organizers turned on the planetarium. The whole hall instantly lit up with stars. This song is dedicated to someone dear to me. She always said I was her brightest star, so I will always watch over her, shine for her, and no matter what happens, I will always be there for her. I love you, Mom. The music came on, and I sang a song about the stars, about our sweet days, about our home, and all these images popped into my head like a music video. It's sad and painful to admit that they won't happen again. Never again. I finished my speech. I bowed, but suddenly something sparkled on the stage. One of the sets fell almost on top of me and grazed my shoulder. I blacked out in great pain. All I remember was screaming from the audience and an ambulance, the hospital, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes, I saw the doctor. He said my vitals were normal, my organs were intact, and soon I would be discharged. My aunt came into the room, pestered me with questions, and I said that as soon as I got out of there, I would leave right away. She said nothing. And where's Mom? My aunt started to cry. Where is she? What about her? My aunt then took me to the next room. Mom had gone into a coma again. She remembered you. As soon as you fell, she remembered you and called an ambulance. She was crying, sitting next to you, holding your head and asking for forgiveness. No, it can't be. It's all my fault. Why did I invite her there? Why? She said you were her star and should shine. She was with you for the first 24 hours, and then she fainted sitting next to you and went back into a coma. My aunt cried when she told me about it, and I couldn't forgive myself for doing that to her. She had just come back to life. I left all the money I'd saved to my aunt, told her that if my mom came to her senses, she could live on it. I would send her money regularly, and I would go away to college. A week later, I went to the hospital to kiss my mother goodbye, and she was still asleep. I cried so bitterly. I hugged her and left her the star-shaped beret I wore as a child. I will always shine for you, I said and kissed her hands. Then I headed for the exit. Orion? What? Mom? I turned around and saw that she'd opened her eyes. Mom, do you recognize me? You sang so beautifully on stage, my little star. I'm so proud of you. Mom, you can't. It's okay, honey. I'm with you. Don't leave me, please. I got so excited. I clenched my fists and hugged her tightly in my arms. Mommy, Mommy! There was nothing else I could say. Eventually, she felt better. Her memories came back, and we moved into our old house, where we now live together. I transferred papers to another college, closer to home and closer to her. And now everything is fine. We did our renovations. Now my whole room was strewn with stars painted by my mom. Happiness. I'm happy that she's okay now.
Hi everyone, my name is Rima. You know, I have a certain peculiarity. Yes, I am not exactly like all children. I am noticeably different from them, and my peculiarity can be easily seen. Now I'll tell you what it's about, but in the meantime, get settled, put likes, and listen further. As a result, I was born the third child in a row. In addition to me, there are two more children, a brother and a sister. I was born relatively late. My parents were 38 years old when I was born. As my mother said, she was waiting for me more than anyone else, because it was she who wanted a child very much. So I got it. It seems that the whole pregnancy went well. The doctors did not say anything bad. And when I was born, everything went well too. Only a couple of hours later, when my mother brought me to feed, the doctor asked if she saw something special about me. My mother did not immediately understand what was being said. "Your baby doesn't have ears," the nurse said. My mother asked again and did not believe her words. She thought that the doctor was confused, that nothing like this can be. Everything was normal, right? But she took off her hat and gasped. She saw me, her son, and I was really without ears. Instead, they were like small appendages sticking out of the head. My mother cried bitterly, and then called the neonatologists. Several doctors gathered in the ward and all began to examine me. A few minutes later, my mother was told that I really have underdeveloped ears, such a pathology, and so far nothing can be done about it, because I am too small. My mother was upset again. She didn't know how I would be able to hear or if I would be able to do it at all. I don't think I'll grow up to be a defective child and all that, but the doctors reassured my mother. They asked her not to panic and not to give up ahead of time, because everything can be solved in our modern world. Then my mother heard a sharp cry from her roommate. The woman who was in the same room with her learned the terrible news. It turned out that her newborn son was found to have a brain tumor, and it is huge. The woman was hysterical, because this is a serious fatal disease. The baby did not really have time to be born, and already has to fight with such an evil disease. At that moment, my mother realized that my diagnosis, my pathology, is nothing compared to what happens to people. In the end, we were released from the hospital and came home. But there was something else waiting for us. My older siblings were very happy with me. They circled around me, kissed me, and wanted to touch me all the time. My mother cried with happiness, and then decided to show my head. She took off hat and the siblings froze. They didn't know how to react and asked if it was normal. My mother hastened to reassure them, saying that everything is fine. I was just born so special. At this moment, my father came up and looked at me almost with disgust. He immediately threw his mother a scandal and began to look for the culprit. But my mother said that this happens and no one is to blame. When my father ran out of indignation, he began to blame my mother for this. It's like all because she gave birth at an old age and all that. My mother started crying, and my father said he wouldn't even touch me. Since then, the quarrels in the house have not subsided. They fought every day. Dad didn't want to look at me, he didn't recognize me, and he didn't like me at all, in any way. In the end, he and my mother divorced, and my mother moved to another city from him. This added to the difficulties in our lives, but my mother understood that it was for the best. After all, she was the only one who really wanted the last child, not her husband. Dad was happy to disappear. He did not help the other children, let alone me. That's how we lived. It was good that my mother had a remote job, a small grocery store, and a bank account, which was enough for us to live. Over time, I grew up and people around me had a lot of questions about my appearance. My mother answered everyone politely at first, and then there were even more questions. And we realized that the more patient and polite you are to answer the curious, the more tactless questions they ask. So we decided to respond rudely and harshly. "I bit them off," my mother would say. People immediately rejected it, but they didn't ask anything else. When I went to kindergarten, the children started asking me questions. I was embarrassed, but I tried to answer as best I could. By the way, yes, my hearing was almost not affected. I, of course, did not hear so well, but I still heard. Then my mother and I came up with a hairstyle that would hide my ears from the eyes. I grew my hair a little longer and walked like this almost all my life. I went to school with the same hairstyle. Of course, it was always impossible to hide it. Well, at least passers-by didn't see it, and that's good. Personally, I was also stressed out by my quits. I really wanted to wear headphones. It is normal to hear and to do other hairstyles. I wanted girls to like me and ask them out, but I had a complex pathology. I began to read a lot about my case on the internet and realized that I was not the only one. I found guys with the same diagnosis and talked to them for a while. As a result, I found a clinic where they performed surgery to restore the auricle. True, it was a complex and expensive operation, but I really wanted it. My mother agreed, but we could not raise money because we were so tight with money. And every time my mother said I was beautiful, I didn't believe her. If I was beautiful, my father wouldn't have left because of me, I told her. I continued to live with complexes and already began to hate myself. And then something incredible happened. I suddenly got a phone call and was invited to come to a trial photo shoot of a clothing line. I thought it was a hoax and didn't agree, but they sent an official email to me. From there, I found out that someone submitted a resume for me to be a model for one of the brands and they agreed. I'm just freaking out. Mom was happy, but she had no idea who did it. Of course, I often heard compliments addressed to me, but I considered them unfair because it was said by people who did not see my ears. In general, I came to the casting and I was hired. I didn't expect this turn of events at all. I was told that I had to go through training and sign a contract. In the end, I asked about my feature, but the editor of the magazine said that it would be my business card and my whole feature. To be honest, I had to spend a lot of time trying to pass off my complexes as achievements and even make them my own ship. But if this is how fate turned out, then why not? So I started my career, I posed for magazines, and then I was invited to the catwalks. My first exit took place 5 months after the start of my career, and this was considered a good indicator. And you know, I was approached by a man who finally tapped me on the shoulder, hugged me, and then called me son. Yes, it was my father. It turned out that it was he who submitted the resume on my behalf. He saw my photos online and decided to make amends. He had just been fired from his job, kicked out of the house by his new wife, and had nowhere to go. I felt sorry for him, but I remembered my mother's tears and sleepless nights, so I gave him half of the evening's fees, patted him on the shoulder, and left. From that moment on, I felt better and stopped holding on to the past. Well, my career continues successfully.